Hey everyone, I am making this recording. I've tried making it several times. I don't have a good video editor, so I've I made it one time and there was a lot of interruption and noise, and then I made it another time and the audio didn't work, and then I made it another time with an editor and found out that editor cost money and I couldn't use it. So I had to throw my edits out with the video. So I'm trying to do this again. This video is gonna be on something I see a lot in my stream right now, different feeds for one reason or another, and it's this notion called the divine council. And in particular, it's the sort of critical scholarship interpretation and probably the mythos, those who call themselves mythicists, who doubt the entire existence of Christ. And the way I understand this view that they have is that way back in 1200 or 1300 BCE, there's some tablets and some writings and things which reference um, some, some names from Scripture. One of them in particular is El, and it's believed in the critical scholarship view that the northern Semitic tribes and people kind of the area where the Israelites, uh, I guess, came into or remained for some time, they had a what they call a pantheon of gods, and El was at the highest, and El had apparently a wife, and there was a hierarchy of um, there was a structure to this pantheon, and El was at the very top, and there are apparently names from the Old Testament that are found in this pantheon. One in particular that I've heard thrown around is Baal. And the idea in the critical scholarship view, as best as I understand it, is that Adonai is taken by the Israelites from a group that migrated later on into the region, because there's apparently some Egyptian reference to this group of nomadic peoples, and that with time, this idea of El became merged with Adonai, and that's what you find in the Old Testament, is this merging of this Most High, El Elyon, as they like to say in the Old Testament, is a reference to this El God from these northern tribes, or this Semitic area, and I think it's called Ugaritic literature. So I just want to kind of give you the stuff so you can look it up if you've never heard of it. Now, as a Christian, these are interesting things, and it provides a tapestry of, um, kind of paints a tapestry, and it shows you that the history in the text isn't as black and white as you think it is when you study these things more in depth. But I want to give you sort of my issue with the particular um, critical scholarship view of God's divine counsel. And so, traditionally in the Old Testament, if you just read the scriptures without this contextualization from that period of time, it's the interpretation you can find yourself in is you've got God, Elohim, which is plural, and you got Jehovah, Yahweh at the top, at the pinnacle, right? And so the critical scholar would argue that's an evolution and not what you find earlier in the text. And so one area of scripture they point to is Deuteronomy 32, where Moses has this poem, and they particularly like to point out verse 7 through 9, and they believe that these three lines or verses are taken from a more ancient text and copied into Moses's poem, and that when Moses wrote his poem, he was referencing or telling the people to remember their the remember the stories, the myths of old, remember the things that your fathers and your elders um, showed you, right? And they would say that's intimating or pointing to these myths with El and this pantheon of that region. And so, you know, they read 7, remember the days of old, consider the years, many generations, ask your father, he will show you, ask your elders, they will tell you. By the way, this is just the King James. I'm just using it because it's so, common. When the Most High, so this is where they'll say, okay, well, this is El Elyon. This is the Most High divided the nations, their inheritance. When he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For, Jehovah, Yahweh, Adonai, which just means master, but they seem to use it interchangeably in the critical scholarship view. But from what I understand, the Hebrew word for Adonai is just master or Lord. It doesn't imply the sacred name of Jehovah. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. So what they're saying is that El Elyon is this God that sits on high, and he gave to Adonai this God that was taken from these tribes that came in later, and gave him a portion. And so they're saying you can see here part of the remnants of that ancient pantheon mythos being incorporated into the Old Testament. And my biggest problem with this, I have two issues with this. So first of all, I just want to show you, if you look at like if you take eSword, for example, and you look at some of the Strong's Concordant, right? And you look at Deuteronomy, sorry, that's 33. Let me come to 32. If you look at 32 here, what verse was it? 7. So if you look at the word, first of all here, the Most High, right? So it is Elyon. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? When the Most High divided up the nations. And then here you have the Lord's portion, which is Yahweh, Jehovah. That's the Hebrew. I couldn't tell you how to pronounce that. I'm assuming it's pronounced Jehovah or Jehovah. If it was spoken today, maybe with some nuances, subtle nuances. But so keep that in mind. If you go to Genesis though, and Genesis, to my knowledge, was written by Moses. So the author of Deuteronomy and Genesis, the first 5 books, is Moses. And so Moses writes this poem here. If you go back to Genesis, when Moses is telling the story of Abraham and Abraham getting blessed, he points out that Abraham attributed the title of El Elyon to Jehovah. And he says, Abraham said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hands unto the Lord, which is Jehovah, the same, as far as I can tell, it's the same word. And I know there's some people who are critical about this type of style of uh, um, this style of what's the word I'm looking for? Analysis. Let's just put it that way. They're critical of this stuff because they'll argue, well, you don't really understand the words. You can't just pluck them out of the text like that and look at how they're used and pick the usage that you want, that you think fits, right? And there's some valid critique to that. However, I think in this case, in one case, I'm using a name, Jehovah. So it's not like I'm using something that has 20 different meanings. And in the other case, I'm using a title, right? El Elyon, which I don't think anyone would argue has multiple meanings. And I'm not trying to give any other, I'm just trying to show that here in Genesis 14, Abraham is telling the king of Sodom, the Lord, the Most High God, the El Elyon, the Elyon El, like he's saying this, So to me, that creates a problem in my head, because if El Elyon is a distinct God in the oldest text of the Old Testament, because the understanding of El and Jehovah evolved as with time to fuse the two into one, then I have a hard time explaining this so early in the text here. In fact, Genesis, I mean, I don't know in what order Moses wrote these texts, um, but I think the consensus is he's the author of them. So I think I'm safe to say that. If somebody wants to correct me and show me where that's wrong, then I'm open to be corrected. But you have that issue. And my other issue here is, is if you go to the book of Deuteronomy, right? If you go to chapter 6, this is still Moses writing, and this is the greatest commandment here, and he tells Israel. He says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. And remember, Elohim is plural, right? But Jehovah is not. What he's telling Israel is the Lord our Elohim is a singular Lord, meaning that even though Elohim is a plurality of terms, is plural, Jehovah is not. And so if El is distinct from Jehovah, if El Elyon is distinct from Jehovah, then that contradicts Deuteronomy 6:4. And you can look at this in several other translations. In Young's, you can see, Hear, O Israel, Jehovah our God, one Jehovah. right? So Jehovah, our Elohim, is one Jehovah. If you look at Rotherham's, Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh alone, right? But this is Elohim, this is plural. If you go to the concordant, Hear, Israel, Yahweh is our Elohim. So Yahweh, this singular being, I mean, however you want to describe him, is our Elohim, is our gods, right? So Yahweh, the only one. And if you read later on in the Old Testament, there are plenty of passages later on, right? I'm using early verses and um, text, the earlier text, because I'm trying to stay within the confines and the constraints that critical scholars, I think, place on the text when they say that the earlier text shows a separation or distinction and there's an evolution, right? So if I stay within those confines, I can at least show that if earlier in the text that doesn't appear to be the case, then I think there's a strong argument to be made that maybe the interpretation that El Elyon is distinct from Jehovah Yahweh early on is incorrect. And I think there's a really strong case for that. If you don't want to use Genesis, you can stick to just Deuteronomy, you know. But I think you shouldn't be afraid to use the other texts. Honestly, I would argue personally that the authorship of the whole scriptures is God, but with, that it's penned at the hands of different individuals. And obviously, with time, scribal errors, um, additions, removals, theology, the text can become difficult to decipher or even sometimes appearing contradictory. But I don't think that's because God is contradicted. He's contradicting himself or is confused. I think that's just the nature of texts and how they evolve, and because humans are the conduit by which these things are written down. You know, the only thing that I know that God ever penned for us was the Ten Commandments with his finger, and Moses broke those tablets right away. So, so those, after that. So, there are other passages of scripture that they use to support the divine, this interpretation of this pantheon. They'll point to Job 2, which I just will show you briefly because I don't want this video to be too long, and I really just wanted to focus on those 2 points of scriptures. But I want to do my best to at least be honest and present as best as I understand the interpretation that critical scholars and some of these individuals who push this concept, their perspective, and if I missed something, I'm happy to be corrected or to be shown what I missed. That's fine. Again, this isn't meant to be comprehensive, but here's Job 2, right? So the only reason I show this is because you can see the day came around again when the sons of Elohim came to the station to station themselves before Yahweh, right? And if you look at Rotherham, so there's a certain day when the sons of God entered in to present themselves. So they'll say that this is evidence of this pantheon. And I think the way they interpret sons of God is they look at it as the offspring of El. Remember, I told you at the beginning there's like that hierarchy. So they'll say that these sons of gods, what this is talking about is it's not referencing angels or some other divine host. It's talking about gods, and it's part of that mythos that got entangled with the text that was from the region. And they're saying you can see it, the fingerprints here of um, that ancient um, belief and construct and culture and everything. So if you go, another one they like to use is Psalm 82, and this one, melody of Asaph. God has taken his place in the august assembly in the midst of gods, right? Will he judge? If you look at Young's A Psalm of Asaph, God has stood in the company of God. In the midst of God does judge. In the midst of God does judge. So I think Young was trying to be a little more consistent with, I'm assuming the words, I have to look at how this is. So God, this is Elohim. And then God's here. This is plural. Yeah, it's kind of weird, you know. Yeah, it gets quirky, right? Because God is Elohim, and Elohim is plural, so God standeth in the congregation of them, you know. So, but they're saying here that this is more evidence of that, and you can see this type of pantheon or council. And you know, if that's the perspective you approach the text with, it it becomes a plausible interpretation. Um, but if you're not aware of that and you just read this, what this psalm reads like is the psalmist Asaph is crying out to God, um, you know, to judge, to rescue the needy, you know, to judge the earth, right? Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you will inherit the nations. So, you know, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't have, you know, okay, again, like I said, you can, but it doesn't have to read as um, a divine court scene where law and order is being distributed to these gods, and because, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But that being said, there's obviously imagery in the Old Testament that portrays a type of um, host surrounding God. My whole contention, to bring it back to the original thing, was that this God, this El Elyon, is Jehovah, has been Jehovah, and will be Jehovah. It's not some tribal god who wasn't known to that area, and who then the Israelites kind of ascribed El to and fused as one. And the other thing you'll hear is that this Adonai, this Jehovah, very much behaves like a storm god, is kind of the term they like to use, a warrior god, and but he also has properties of this El god, and so that's kind of where they say this thing with time fused. And there's plenty of videos and stuff you can watch and learn about that. But I just kind of want to share those thoughts with you guys. I think it's fair to criticize um, within the confines of the Bible, to criticize some of those external interpretations that I feel are placed onto the text. Um, and not allowing the text to kind of speak for itself. I don't think that's inappropriate. You know, historical context can be super helpful. I'm just saying I have a particular issue with this interpretation because it conflicts with what appears to be a different interpretation that's already kind of seated in the text from Genesis, you know. And there is one interesting passage in Genesis with Jehovah. Um, and, you know, because you might ask, why was the word Elohim used to describe um, Jehovah if Moses believed that the gods was only just singularly Jehovah? And obviously you could say, well, it was a cultural thing. Moses was raised by the Egyptians. He was he was probably very, I mean, to my knowledge, he grew up like in the palace, like royalty. He was probably very well aware of the Egyptian gods. So the idea of a plurality of gods to him was not anything unusual, and it may just have been a custom of the time and region when referencing the divine to do it in that sort of way as gods, and not singularly God. But clearly, what he believed and what he penned in Deuteronomy is that Elohim is Jehovah alone. That's it. To us, the Israelites, listen, Israel, this is who God is. Um, or this is the God of gods, right? This is and that's probably more accurate maybe to think this is the God of gods, Jehovah. But anyways, kind of, let me see if I can find that passage in Genesis that I think it's interesting. It's let us go down. Okay, here you go. So it's Genesis 11. Bum, 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 bum. So in Genesis 11, what verse was it? Oh yeah. Then Yahweh said. So here's this is Jehovah, right? Singular. Then let me see. That's fine. We can use this text, or we can use the King James, whatever. And the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they all have one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us, let us." So Jehovah's talking. Who is he saying? Let us. Is Jehovah? I mean, Jehovah is a singular name, and it's always assumed to be a singular entity. But why does God say? Why does Jehovah say, "Let us go down"? Is he talking about his chariots and his divine counsel? Does he need? Does everyone need to descend there, or is God referring, or is Jehovah referring to himself in a plural way? And does that have anything to do with why maybe to the Israelites, Elohim, which is plural, was Jehovah alone, right? Is there? I don't know. I just think it's peculiar. You could certainly say no. This is just talking about um, this is just talking about God is saying to his council, "Hey, let's all go down there," right? But you don't really see evidence that any of that happened. Usually, when God is talking about his council, it's kind of clear. He comes with 10,000 of his chariots, and right, you've heard, like the what was it, Deuteronomy 33, where you have that song. God it was on Sinai with what is it? Where is it? And the Lord came from Sinai. He shined 10,000 of his saints, right? So I don't know. It's just weird to me that this is let us, and maybe this is just a quirk of sort of the language and how it got translated. But I mean, even like Rotherham says, "Come on, let us go down," and confuse their speech. Young says, "Give help, let us go down and mingle there." Concordant says, "Prithee, descend will we." Prithee. Descend will we. So Jehovah's talking here, and then he says, like, it'd be like I'm talking, I'm narrating, I'm talking to someone, and I'm like, look, the people. Well, I guess if you're talking to people, you probably tell your people, hey, let's go over there. But I don't know. I just thought it was strange because he kind of says let us, but then he's the only one who goes down there. So, or at least we're told it's just Jehovah who does that. So I don't know. Anyways, probably going way off on a tangent. I apologize. I hope that this video was interesting to you, that you didn't fall asleep, didn't bore you to death. I just ask that if you have issues, if you disagree or whatever, just please do so respectfully. I'm not looking to, have these big flame wars with people. So I just ask that you be respectful in the comments section. You're totally free to disagree with me. I know that this kind of stuff just engenders a ton of disagreements. So, but I wanted to just get that opinion out there because there's such a, like I said in my other video, there's a cacophony of noise and on this kind of stuff because even I'm getting inundated with it and I don't even really go looking for it. So it's kind of odd to be seeing a lot of it lately, but it's kind of inspired me to say, hey, let me just add my voice to the cacophony of sound out there because that's what we need, more noise. So anyways, thanks for watching, guys. And I know I said I wasn't going to try and make my videos always about faith and stuff, but this is just something that I felt inspired to share. And so hopefully it's useful for some people. I don't know. If you like the video, then please like it, subscribe. If this is something you like and you want to see more of these sorts of things, please let me know, leave a comment, and I'm happy to do more. But if nobody's interested or people think this is just terrible format or not interesting at all, then obviously it's probably not worth doing unless I just really, really feel compelled to. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.